Hi and welcome to the latest IoT Now video. Today I am delighted to have with us Alistair Fulton, the General Manager and Vice President of IoT, LoRa and Consumer Sensing Businesses at Semtech. Great to have you here, Alistair.
Morning, Jeremy. Glad to be here.
Now, Semtech is a name that will be familiar to many as a supplier of advanced semiconductors and algorithms for infrastructure, high-end consumer and industrial equipment. And in an industry sometimes obsessed by what's new, it's great to talk to a technology company that's actually been publicly traded since 1967. These days, Semtech is listed on the NASDAQ Global Select Market. For anyone new to the Internet of Things, Semtech's LoRa Device-to-Cloud platform is a globally adopted long-range, hence the abbreviation LoRa, and low-power solution for IoT applications. It enables the rapid deployment of ultra-low power, cost-efficient and long-range IoT networks, gateways, sensors, module products, and IoT services worldwide. In fact, LoRa devices provide the communication layer for the LoRaWAN standard, which is maintained by the LoRa Alliance, an open IoT alliance for low-power, wide-area network applications. Let's just call that LPWAN. The standard has been used to deploy IoT networks in over 100 countries, and Semtech is, unsurprisingly, a founding member of the LoRa Alliance. Alistair, I hope that kind of covers it. I've tried to be as brief as possible.
It does, and as you said, 1967. I think Semtech stands as one of the the older companies in this space. So
it really
doesn't feel like that.
Well, that's great. So with people spending more time at home post-COVID, connectivity is pretty much more critical than ever. Can long-range, low-power technology address in-office and in-home connectivity challenges that are faced by traditional platforms like Wi-Fi or Bluetooth? And if so, what are the advantages in, I don't know, cost, ease of deployment, and etc.?
Sure. IoT is really a jigsaw. And long-range, low-power options play a key part along with other technologies. Different devices require different connectivity, and depending upon the bandwidth, the type of signal they're sending, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, there's a range of different tools that are available. Long-range, LoRa offers a really low-cost, easy to deploy solution for assets that move distances, without having to worry about coverage from Bluetooth or Wi-Fi coverage reaching outside the home. And it also offers a really excellent way to connect devices that move in and out of the home. We've seen LoRa used for tracking of pets, tracking of family members, tracking of things that come in and out of the building, parcels, etc. And that flexibility and that ability to support assets almost regardless of where they are is really key when you're trying to build solutions that encompass the operation of a building or indeed a home. The addition of location capabilities, which we enabled last year actually with the introduction of a platform called LoRa Edge, really enables tracking of those assets as well in a low-cost, low-power way, which is also really critical. But the other thing that's important in those environments is interoperability. And that's why I describe it as a jigsaw. And LoRa, one of the design principles, I guess, that we've always followed is that interoperability is really a key capability. Developers need flexibility. They need to be able to use a range of different tools, and they need to be able to put those tools together in a pretty seamless way. And I would like to say that all technologies have followed that path, but I'm not always sure that that's the case. I think either by omission or by act, some technologies are actually quite difficult to use with one another, and we think at the end of the day that really stands in the way of customers trying to build solutions for things like smart home or smart building.
Talking of which, I mean, 5G is getting so many headlines, and not always justifiably, but 5G adoption in IoT has, of course, started, but it's still very slow. And in many cases, it's not going to fit a company's IoT use case. So the industry is still going to need connectivity solutions from a variety of sources. What are the questions that your customers are asking you now about future connectivity?
I mean, overall, I think 5G is a really excellent tool for connecting devices which have, high bandwidth connections, things like video, real-time video in particular. but it comes at a cost in terms of both power requirement and physical cost of ownership and operation. Private 5G deployments, much like private LTE, will also provide, I think, a really important tool for enterprise customers kind of seeking to connect assets, requiring those high bandwidth connections. However, customers, I think, in both enterprise and consumer spaces, they're a little wary of being tied to cellular operators because of the costs involved for connectivity. And like many people in this space, myself, I started in a cellular environment. And I think cellular operators themselves have really been hamstrung by a business model that relies on charging for the transit of data, whether that's voice or data. And I think that in a lot of IoT applications, particularly mass IoT applications, where you have tens upon tens of thousands of sensors, which is where LoRaWAN, I think, really has a sweet spot. That business model just doesn't work. A lot of the time with customers now, in the past, customers were trying to evaluate the IoT technologies at their disposal and trying to figure out what IoT was. I think most customers are past that stage, and they're mostly looking at return on investment. And a lot of IoT cases, by their nature, are quite marginal. If I deliver a 10% improvement in this before, how much do I save? How much do I generate? And because of that, the marginal cost of connecting the individual, one of those tens of thousands of sensors, if it comes with a connectivity tariff, breaks the ROI. It breaks the business case. And so I think there's a very real blocker when it comes to using cellular technologies in a pervasive way. The other aspect, I think, is that customers really want to control their own destiny. Just like they don't want to be tied to cellular, they don't want to be stuck with a single network choice. And so the open business model of LoRaWAN supports either using a provider of a network server or indeed deploying your own LoRaWAN network. And we see customers at varying shades of grey, from using public operator networks through to exclusively using private LoRaWAN networks, and pretty much every stop in between. And that flexibility, that choice, and that interoperability between LoRaWAN and other technologies is really key. History has taught a lot of enterprise customers, particularly, that lock-in is bad. And so they are very, very averse. And I think that's something that really drives interest in technologies like LoRaWAN.
Yeah, that's a very real experience for many. I'm not sure if these are the latest figures, but I understand that there are 151 public or private network operators connecting over 190 million end nodes to LoRaWAN networks. Is that still the latest figure? And do you expect, in which particular areas do you expect to see the most growth?
It grows daily is the answer, and it's often quite hard to keep track of. But yeah, it's around 150 plus. Where do we expect to see the most growth? I think in terms of geography, what we're seeing at the moment is the great majority of Europe is covered with public LoRaWAN networks. The US is growing very rapidly, particularly with the advent of more viral networks like Helium, which is rolling out extremely swiftly, both in the US, but in Europe and now China. Africa, I think, is very active at the moment in LoRaWAN. We see a lot of public network operators standing up networks in Africa to support growing economies. And I think, in many ways, some of the economies in Africa are the most innovative and fastest growing, currently globally. South America is...
Which countries in Africa?
I mean, it's pretty much all over. It's sub-Saharan, it's West Coast Africa. I've seen at least 9 or 10 different operators announce plans in the course of the last year. And again, I think it's the low-cost nature of the network technology and the ease of deployment that means, that kind of drives that adoption. In terms of use case, I think utilities will always be strong. Utilities, and specifically automated AMI meter reading, was in many ways the birthplace of LoRaWAN. But industrial, smart buildings, smart cities, really the built environment, smart homes, smart ag, all of those areas are growing rapidly. Basically, any industry where data and telemetry are critical to driving efficiency and productivity. You know, I've always regarded the promise of the IoT as being the ability to produce more from less. And so pretty much any industry that produces or consumes raw material to produce something else, we see LoRaWAN used in one way or form. Rarely a day goes by that I don't come across a new use case and go, wow, that's, you know, didn't expect to see that. I think the launch of the LoRa Edge platform last year, which, as I mentioned earlier, it provides a single chip solution for both indoor and outdoor location, as well as LoRaWAN. We're seeing really rapid growth in the asset tracking and logistics space as well. And that problem of, well, there's great technology options for me to track a package indoors, and there's great technology options to track a package outdoors, but there isn't one that spans the two, and few of those options are low power in nature. There's a really unmet need for kind of tracking everything. I mean, we have customers who use LoRaWAN to track pallets as a distribution system, hundreds of thousands of assets, and knowing where they are at any point in their life is a truly transformative source of data for those customers. So kind of everywhere, really. And I think more recently, and I think we'll talk about this at the moment, the advent of satellite networks as well is kind of, you know, filling in that coverage map, if you like, even further to include pretty much everywhere.
I definitely want to come to that. First, I'd like to ask a little bit more about the work that you've been doing since, I think, end of last year with Amazon Web Services to enable LoRaWAN network connectivity on AWS IoT Core on its managed cloud service. What advantages can you offer customers through this?
LoRaWAN for AWS IoT Core does one thing. It essentially black boxes LoRaWAN connectivity. It means that a developer can focus on building a powerful IoT application rather than worrying about how the data gets from A to B. It allows a developer to buy a gateway, you know, go to DigiKey or others and buy a LoRaWAN gateway for as little as $50 for indoor gateways, plug it in, connect it to AWS, and they have their own private LoRaWAN network at that point, and they're able to then start building applications. And it's that simplicity that we think is really, really critical. If you look at where most IoT developers are going to come from, I mean, with the greatest respect, they're going to be a lot younger than you and I, and they come from a mobile application development background or a cloud application development background. And a lot of the embedded development skills that you know I had in my many years ago, I would say, they're not really they're not that prevalent anymore. Programming in C on bare metal, these aren't things that recent graduates are very familiar with. And so making technologies like LoRaWAN accessible to those cloud developers is really, really critical, I think, not just for LoRaWAN. I think overall in the IoT, you know, there's been for a long, long time a technology barrier that has prevented developers from entering the space. And that's why when we look at the forecasts of the billions and billions of devices that should be here, that's why we don't have that many devices yet. So I think by chipping away at that technology barrier through things like LoRaWAN for AWS IoT Core, that's a really key way in which, you know, we as an ecosystem can start enabling some of that growth. It's a model that, you know, as you mentioned, we've been working on for a while with AWS, but it's also a model that we expect to see replicated elsewhere.
Can you tell us a bit about something slightly different, which is your work in satellite connectivity with swarm technologies?
Yeah, it's a very exciting development actually through the course of last year. We had Swarm as one of the first ones actually, and satellite operators start to approach us to talk about LoRaWAN, and I've got to say that was a bit of a head scratcher for us initially. But the reality is that I mean, I've used satellite connectivity in solutions in the past. You know, it's a sledgehammer. I mean, you need connectivity, satellite will deliver. It comes with a hefty price and it comes with a hefty power requirement. So depending on the value of the asset, you're pretty selective in how you use it, and I've seen it used in the satellite monitoring of pipelines, etc., etc., etc. But that cost is really quite prohibitive. Swarm is one of a number of satellite operators who are launching satellite networks using LoRaWAN. In Swarm's case, they're launching LEOs, low Earth orbit satellites, roughly the size of a toaster. They're launching several hundred of them to provide ubiquitous global coverage. Other companies are moving down this path as well. EchoStar, I think, is quite a key one, particularly for Europe. And EchoStar announced quite recently that they're looking at launching a LoRaWAN-based solution, initially covering Europe, and then potentially in the future covering elsewhere. We see satellite as a really valuable complement for terrestrial LoRaWAN coverage. It allows IoT applications to extend beyond populated areas into rural and remote areas where, if you like, the value of IoT data doesn't correlate with population density. Actually, in some ways, it kind of runs contra
It's
to.
inverse, yeah.
It's inverse, yeah, because for use cases like monitoring energy production, transit through pipelines or grid systems, raw material extraction, monitoring oceanographic or meteorological conditions. I mean, the list is kind of endless. That reach is really key. If you don't have reach, you don't have data. If you don't have data, you don't have an ability to solve the problem. We've seen some really innovative applications like tracking wild rhino populations in Africa using satellite, using analytics to determine if the rhino is exhibiting signs of stress associated with poaching activity, and then dispatching, park rangers to go protect the animal. I mean, kind of use cases like which, I'm like, wow, that's a really innovative use case, and it really does demonstrate what happens if you give developers easy to use, powerful tools that are flexible. They come up with an amazing array of innovative ideas that you and I could never have thought of.
I love that. So finally, Alistair, where can viewers learn more about Semtech and LoRa?
Well, there's Semtech.com, of course, but the LoRa Alliance is also an excellent source of information about what's happening in the world of LoRaWAN, a rich catalogue of use cases. We also have a very good developer portal where, as pretty much from a beginning developer through to a really quite experienced developer, there's a range of tools and resources to support the development of applications. But actually, and I'd also increasingly say in the mainstream press, what I've seen happen over the course of the last couple of years really is LoRaWAN going from being, one of a number of quite niche technologies to really mainstream technologies, and it's things like the use of LoRa in the sidewalk network and helium. There's a lot of things that have driven that collectively, but I do think that at its core is our focus and the focus of our ecosystem partners. And one of the things about LoRaWAN is it has a very extensive ecosystem of partners, which means choice for customers. There is a very common theme around simplicity, ease of deployment, low cost, flexibility, and so pretty much start with the LoRa Alliance, and from there you can branch out into applications that cover every possible IoT use case you can think of.
Well, I'm pleased to say there's also a more in-depth interview with you in the latest edition of IoT Now magazine, which is available for free download, of course, at iot-now.com. In the meantime, Alistair, thank you very much for your time. It's been really interesting to hear more about what you've been doing.
Great pleasure. Thanks, Jeremy.
And ladies and gentlemen, thanks for your time. Join us again soon for another IoT Now video. Bye for now.